They handed me a forced resignation letter, the same morning my family honored men of integrity at Veterans Park. Names Thaddeus 50, ex-Chief Compliance, still carry the chipped signet ring I removed that night under buzzing fluorescent lights and stale coffee air. Ever been erased in public? By your own blood. My name wasn't on the list. Not as a guest, not as family, not even as a footnote. The young officer at the registration tent had checked 3 times, each time a little slower, his finger dragging along the clipboard like it might summon me, if only he squinted harder. I said nothing, just offered him the kind of nod that tells a man it's not his fault and not his fight. He looked 19, maybe 20 on a brave day. "I'm sorry, sir. I can't, I'm not authorized to—" "It's all right," I said. "You've done your job." Behind me, the late morning sun stretched long shadows over the bleachers. Rows of folding chairs stood like waiting soldiers ordered by nameplates and military rank. My father's chair sat in the front row center, flanked by a state senator on one side and the town's oldest American Legion member on the other. A crisp white program rested on each seat corners, clipped for wind. Merrick Honor Ceremony. The heading read in gold block letters. My last name. Their moment. Their narrative. I walked the edge of the fence until I found a patch of sunburnt grass just behind a row of hedges 10 yards outside the cordoned area. A folding lawn chair sat there forgotten, maybe left by a maintenance crew or a vendor. I didn't ask. I sat. The chain-link fence between me and the ceremony wasn't tall, maybe 4 feet, but it might as well have been glass. One way. They couldn't see through it. I could. The high school marching band was tuning up across the lot. One trumpet kept hitting a sour B-flat, then adjusting. It made me think of boot camp when we used to march off step just to annoy the drill sergeants. A sharp crack of a mic announced the ceremony's start. I watched my brother Clark step up to the podium. His dress blues were immaculate, every metal polished, every crease aligned with factory precision. His collar held the sweat like a secret. He opened the ceremony by reading names, Merrick after Merrick, each one tied to a memory, a medal, a moment of service that had been curated and distilled into honor. My name did not come up, not in the first round, not in the second. I wasn't surprised. Not really. I reached into the inside pocket of my weathered coat and felt the small, cool curve of the signet ring I had once worn every day. The family crest had softened over the years, its grooves worn down from salutes, from typed memos, from clenched hands in closed-door meetings. I didn't put it on. I hadn't in 6 years. Rand Sr. My father sat with his arms crossed, shoulders back posture, unbothered by age or memory. He nodded occasionally, smiled politely at punchlines delivered from the stage. At one point, he laughed deep and real at something a city councilman whispered beside him. I remembered that laugh. It was the one he reserved for people who had already proven themselves useful. I took off my shoes. Not for symbolism. Just because the sun had warmed the grass beneath me, and I wanted to feel something real. The soles of my feet pressed into the ground with more connection than my last 5 years in this town. The councilman on stage recited lines about legacy, about duty, about how honor was passed from generation to generation like a sacred torch. I wondered briefly if anyone on that stage had read the quiet 4-page memo I filed in 2016, the one that never saw daylight, but stopped a retirement fund from being gutted by a contractor no one dared question. The program moved forward like clockwork. Plaques were handed out. Flags were folded and presented. A PowerPoint slideshow flickered behind the podium, old photos of Merricks in uniform, marching, saluting, smiling. My photo wasn't among them. Not that I expected it to be. I leaned forward and ran my hand along the dusty grass. A crushed cigarette butt stuck to my palm. I flicked it away without malice. Across the fence, Clark finished his speech. He took a step back, chin lifted, trying to look both humble and deserving. He was both in his way. He'd served with distinction, risen through the ranks with fewer bruises than I had. My name was skipped again. Deliberately this time. There was a pause, a brief one, before the MC moved on. Like they'd edited the script just before print and hadn't found a smooth way to sew the hole shut. My father didn't flinch. My breath slowed. Not from sadness, from clarity. The kind that only comes when something breaks clean, no splinters. I didn't come here to be included. I came here to remember that no one gets to erase truth. They can white it out in the programs, leave it out of the speeches, cut it from the slideshow, but truth, when left unspoken, doesn't vanish. It waits. And today I was here to wait with it. I used to believe integrity would protect me. In 2016, I learned otherwise. The Columbia Veterans Affairs Association headquarters sat inside an aging concrete building just off Assembly Street. The air conditioning hummed like it was holding its breath. The overhead fluorescents buzzed, one of them flickering in protest. On the wall above the coffee station hung a bronze memorial plaque engraved with names of soldiers whose stories were cleaner than mine. I wasn't there to make friends. I was there to make sense. As Chief Compliance Officer, my job was to verify, investigate, and report. Not to win popularity contests. Not to ignore patterns. The pattern started small, 2 pensions paid twice in 1 quarter. At first I thought it was a clerical oversight. It wasn't. Then came the shell names entities with patriotic acronyms that didn't file with the IRS, didn't show up in our vendor system, but somehow received monthly disbursements. The deeper I looked, the worse it got. The numbers didn't just hint, they screamed. Tens of millions had been quietly funneled through these ghost accounts. All of them authorized by someone higher than me, hidden within board-level approvals signed en masse. Some bore Clark's initials. That stung more than I admitted at the time. I compiled the findings, neat, precise sourced, attached emails, internal audits, flagged dates. I submitted the report through formal protocol directly to the Internal Oversight Committee. I followed the rules because the rules, I believed, protected people like me. I waited. For a week, there was silence. Not even an acknowledgement email. Not even a calendar invite to discuss it. Then came the meeting. I hadn't called it. They summoned me to Conference Room C, a place usually reserved for donor briefings and board holiday photos. The coffee pot was fresh. Someone had set out a tray of sugar cookies, like this was a going-away party. The room already held 3 people when I entered: the director, a legal counsel I didn't recognize, and Clark. My brother couldn't look at me. Thaddeus, the director, began, smile fixed like the plaque outside, "We deeply value your years of service." I waited. I already knew what was coming. The sentence that shifts air in a room like a draft under a locked door. "We'd like to offer you an early retirement package. Full honors, full benefits." I said nothing. Clark finally spoke, but only halfway. "It's the best path forward. For everyone." They didn't fire me. They made me resign gracefully, so no one would have to explain what I found. No headlines, no FOIA requests, just a quiet change in directory listings and a sanitized press release. That afternoon I cleared out my office. The desk drawers were mostly paper clips and expired badge lanyards. I flipped over the framed certificate that read Service Beyond Reproach. The back of the frame was dusty, its cardboard lining warped. I placed my badge in the velvet-lined envelope HR had provided. On the way out, I paused in front of the memorial plaque and stared at the name Merrick carved into bronze, my grandfather's. He'd served with honor in the Pacific. No one ever questioned his records. At home that evening, I opened the top drawer of my bedroom dresser and took out a small, dark blue velvet box. It smelled faintly of cedar and thyme. Inside, the Merrick signet ring lay quiet and polished untouched since my last inspection. I slipped it off my finger. There was no ceremony, no vow, just skin lighter where the gold had sat. I placed the ring into the box and closed the lid, not with bitterness, just precision. A week later, a formal letter arrived by courier. We thank Mr. Merrick for his exemplary conduct and graceful transition. No mention of findings, no mention of the 14-page report now buried somewhere under legal review. At the next family dinner, held in our grandfather's house on Gervais Street, a long table had been set with silverware that didn't match and napkins folded with military crispness. Name cards sat neatly at each place. When I found mine, it simply read, Thaddeus. No chief, no lieutenant, no son of Rand. Just me. Detached. Corrected. Clark sat across the table. He said grace before the meal, but avoided my eyes. My father raised a toast. To legacy. And to knowing when to pass the torch. Some laughed. I smiled. It didn't reach my eyes. They didn't remove my title. They replaced it with a shrug. I hadn't seen Reverend Silas Norwell in years. He still made the best coffee and the worst small talk. The animal clinic hadn't changed much since Mason was a pup. Same chipped linoleum, same bulletin board full of lost dog flyers yellowing at the corners. The place smelled of wet fur, antiseptic, and memory. Mason, my aging German shepherd, lay beside my chair, ears twitching at every yelp from the exam room. I was thumbing through a vet brochure on senior canine nutrition when I heard the cane before I saw the man. A soft tap. 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 Not hesitant measured. Intentional. Thaddeus Merrick came, the voice warm as old flannel. I'll be damned. Reverend Norwell, I said, rising instinctively. Still vertical, I see. He grinned and offered his hand, bones and tendons visible beneath papery skin, but his grip was still firm, still caffeinated and curious, which is more than most my age. He waved off the vet assistant and nodded toward the back. Let me buy you a bad cup of coffee. The clinic's waiting lounge had a side room now partitioned off with frosted glass and a few worn leather chairs. There was a machine humming beside a dented mini-fridge. He poured 2 styrofoam cups and handed me one like it was communion. We sat without talking for a while. The silence wasn't awkward, it was earned. We'd been through the same furnace once in Kandahar. A 2-month deployment, investigating black market fuel siphoning that somehow turned into an 8-month stay and a classified file thicker than a chapel Bible. He broke the silence. How's Mason holding up better than me, I said. Arthritis is in his hips, but he still knows how to guilt me into walks. Silas chuckled. Smart dog. He always had better instincts than our entire audit team. The cane leaned against his knee. His free hand tapped the lid of his coffee like he was keeping time to a hymn only he could hear. "You look like a man who's carrying something heavy," he said. I didn't reply. Not directly. I just stared past the frosted glass at the smudged outlines of leashes, tails, and sneakers. Silas didn't press. He never did. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a plain manila envelope. Its top corner was dog-eared, as if he'd been turning it over in his thoughts for days. "If you ever want the record unsealed, even for a moment," he said quietly. This might help. He didn't slide it across the table. He just held it steady, like he was waiting for me to make a choice. I didn't ask what was inside. I didn't need to. Who would I even give it to? I asked, not really expecting an answer. Silas shrugged. "Sometimes we don't pass truth to people. Sometimes we just stop hiding it from ourselves." I took the envelope. Didn't open it. Just rested it on my knee and kept my hand on top of it, like it might float away otherwise. "You know they erased me," I said. "Family board, even Clark." "They didn't erase you," Silas replied. "They paused your chapter." "That's different." I looked at him, then really looked. The lines around his mouth had deepened. His suit was old but clean. His shoes had been resoled more than once. He wore a veteran's pin on his lapel, slightly tarnished. He sipped his coffee, made a face. "Still tastes like regret." I laughed for the first time in days. Mason gave a soft grunt at our feet, shifting his weight. He'd always liked Silas. They both carried quiet like a badge. "I'm not saying do anything Silas said. I'm just saying when a man loses his compass, it helps to remember where he last saw true north." I folded the envelope once and slid it inside my coat. We walked outside together, sun cutting sharp across the sidewalk. I offered to drive him home, but he waved me off. Said he had a sermon to finish and a wife who'd kill him if he was late for dinner. At the diner next door, an old haunt with cracked vinyl booths and a jukebox that hadn't worked since the Obama administration, I ordered a black coffee and a grilled cheese. Mason lay beneath the table, nose twitching toward the kitchen. I waited until the coffee arrived. Then, slowly, I unfolded the first page of the envelope. "Request for temporary clearance. Personal valor appeal." It was in my name. The instructions were simple sign date, submit to the Department of Defense Review Board. It would grant me 45 minutes of declassification, enough to tell one story. Enough to remind one crowd that not all heroes wear their shame on command. I stared at the blank signature line for a long time. I didn't know if I'd sign it, but I knew exactly where I'd keep it. In the velvet box, next to the ring. I signed it on a Thursday. Not because I was brave, but because I was done hiding. The morning had come in gray, flat light, like the sky hadn't decided whether it cared. I stood barefoot in the kitchen of my old farmhouse, listening to the slow creak of the front porch in the wind. It sounded like someone trying not to say something. The table in front of me was covered with legal forms. No coffee, no breakfast, just paper. Pages spread like old confessions. Their ink sharper than memory, colder than truth. I had read them 3 times. Not for understanding, but for ritual. The government didn't give second chances. They gave windows. And mine was 45 minutes wide. The request for temporary clearance. Personal valor appeal was page 1. Then came the waivers, the acknowledgement of risk, the reaffirmation of a non-disclosure clause that could silence a man with more force than any bullet. The last page had 3 blank lines, signature date witness. I would fill 2. The witness would be verified by courier. I pulled the velvet box from the side drawer, the one with the cedar lining. It still carried the scent of when I first placed the ring inside years ago, back when stepping away felt like principle, not punishment. The ring sat inside unchanged. My family's crest, faint, worn, still caught the morning light from the window, though just barely. I reached for it. But my hand, maybe heavier than usual, maybe too tired, faltered. The ring slipped from my fingers and hit the tile floor. Not with a clang, with a thud. It rolled in a soft, imperfect circle, then stopped against the leg of the chair. I crouched slower than I used to, and picked it up. A small chip, just off-center, like a scar on a face no one expects to see aged. I didn't curse, didn't mourn. I just looked at it for a long time. Damage, yes, but not defeat. The ring was still what it had always been, weighty, stubborn, loyal, just no longer pristine. I wrapped it in a handkerchief, one of my father's monogrammed RM, in fading thread, and placed it beside the signed documents. It looked smaller than I remembered. Outside, a crow landed on the porch rail. It blinked once, unimpressed, then flew off. The sky remained undecided. I packed everything into a plain envelope, sealed it with the government-issued sticker that read, "Time-sensitive hand-only transfer." No postage, no barcode, just a name, a date, and a quiet code authorizing one man's voice for less than an hour. At precisely 1:17 p.m., the courier arrived. He didn't knock, just waited at the porch rail until I opened the screen door. He wore a gray windbreaker federal badge on his lanyard, eyes scanning more than observing. "Mr. Merrick?" he asked. I nodded. "You're early." "Better than late." He didn't ask for ID. Just handed me a small stylus and tablet, watched me sign, then took the envelope with both hands like it was nuclear. We didn't shake hands. He didn't say good luck. I didn't need him to. When the screen door snapped shut behind me, the porch creaked again. This time I imagined it sounded like acknowledgement. Back inside, I sat at the kitchen table, now bare. Only a chipped porcelain coffee cup remained last night's. I hadn't finished it. The rim had a faint hairline crack that had been there since I moved in. It had never spread. It just lived there. The laptop screen blinked with a new email. Subject clearance approved. Valor appeal request. I clicked once. Window 45 minutes. On-site presence only. No press. No replication. Non-disclosure reaffirmed. You will be escorted. You may speak. Nothing may be recorded. The blinking cursor in the reply window waited like a question I didn't need to answer. I didn't iron my shirt. I didn't print a speech. I booked a one-way ticket and packed nothing that needed explanation. Because when the truth is finally allowed to breathe, even for 45 minutes, it doesn't need luggage. I heard the engines before I saw them, deep coordinated like thunder with a compass. They didn't scream. They didn't flash. They arrived like judgment measured undeniable. From behind the hedgerow across Assembly Street, 3 Humvees turned the corner flanked by black Suburbans without decals. No sirens, no flags, just the synchronized motion of trained men moving as one. Even the pigeons didn't fly away. They simply shifted in place as if they understood this wasn't noise but arrival. Veterans Park, hushed itself. The mayor's voice, mid-praise of generational sacrifice, slowed to a comma, then evaporated. Clark stood at the podium mid-sentence, hand still raised in half-gesture. His mouth stayed slightly open, searching for where the script had gone. General Ellery Langford stepped out of the lead vehicle. If you didn't know who he was, you'd still know. Not by medals or posture, but by the silence that followed him like a second uniform. 4 stars U.S. Central Command. No public statement. No media. Just him, and behind him 200 soldiers in full dress. I was still outside the fence. My lawn chair was still dented from where I'd leaned too hard earlier. The sun was directly overhead now, casting short, unforgiving shadows. My boots pressed into the grass, but left no sound. The general didn't go to the stage. He didn't acknowledge the mayor, or Clark, or my father, who now stood frozen in the front row, jaw visibly set, knuckles tight on the chair's armrest. Langford walked the aisle straight down the ceremonial center, past the flower arrangements, past the color guard, still holding flags at attention, past the whispering guests, who instinctively rose to their feet. He walked until he reached the fence. Then someone, some invisible someone, unlatched the gate. No noise, just motion. Langford stepped through and stopped in front of me. I stood slowly, instinct making my spine straighten before my brain caught up. We hadn't spoken since 2016. He didn't extend a hand. He saluted. "Mr. Merrick," he said, voice deep and even, "you held the line, not for politics, for people. That's the definition we'll remember." Behind him, as if on cue, the 200 soldiers shifted in unison. Not loud, not dramatic, just one shared breath, and then salute. 200 hands to brows, one ripple of fabric and honor. And for the first time in 6 years, my name was said aloud, by a man with the authority to carve it in granite if he chose. No applause, no anthem, just truth standing uninvited. I didn't return the salute. Not yet. My hand was inside my coat pocket, fingers grazing the edge of the chipped ring. It had been there all morning, like a weight, like a question. I looked past the general. Clark stood frozen, his cue cards fluttering slightly in the breeze. His hand trembled on the podium edge. A vein pulsed in his temple. Rand Sr. didn't sit, didn't blink. I stepped forward through the gate someone had quietly unlatched. My boots finally made sound on the trimmed grass. Light, deliberate. The guests didn't move. Neither did the officials on stage. The only motion came from the trembling flagpoles caught in a breeze that hadn't existed 5 minutes ago. Langford dropped his salute only after I had stepped beside him. "You don't owe them a speech," he murmured. "I don't plan to give one," I said. We stood there, 2 men surrounded by ceremony but untouched by it. Behind us the formation held. Still, quiet, precise. The honor wasn't scripted. It wasn't earned today. It was acknowledged. I didn't recognize him by name. But the way he stood, spine firm but not stiff, holding a creased envelope like it meant more than air, I knew. The ceremony had paused after the salute. No one said intermission, but no one resumed either. The mayor sat with his note cards clenched in a polite half-frown. Clark still stood at the podium, now speechless, in a way no script could fix. The MC murmured something about open remarks, probably trying to regain control. Then he stepped forward. A man in his mid-30s. Tan blazer, well-worn shoes. No name tag. He didn't head to the stage, just the side mic set up for local testimonies. People shifted, unsure whether he belonged. "I won't take long," he began, voice steady but intimate. "My name is Thomas Gable. I'm not anyone official." Clark leaned slightly toward the stage mic as if to interrupt, but something in the man's tone made him stop. "My father was Sergeant First Class Emery Gable, 38 years of service, retired with complications from Gulf exposure. Some of you here might have served with him or under him." He wasn't loud, just loyal. Thomas's eyes swept the crowd, not seeking recognition, but memory. "Back in 2016, my father was caught in a pension adjustment. Payments slowed, then stopped. No one explained. VA said it was a processing error. He knew better." He held up the envelope. "I found this after he passed. He'd kept every letter, every form, and one email chain flagged, printed, highlighted." He opened the flap slowly. Dated March 4th, 2016. Subject line: "Discrepancy in Tier 4 veteran disbursements. Sender T. Merrick, Chief Compliance." The air thickened. You could hear cloth shift on folding chairs. Thomas took out the paper, held it delicately thumb, just touching the faded edge. He told me once, "This man will never get credit, not officially, not in their ceremonies, but he stopped them from taking what little dignity I had left." The page quivered slightly as Thomas adjusted it. "There's a notarized memo, too," he continued. "My dad wrote it by hand, had it certified a month before he died. It says, 'If truth is buried, plant a marker.'" A hush covered the park, not solemn expectant. Thomas looked at me, not with gratitude, with witness. He didn't leak it. He didn't grandstand. But he reported it. And because he did, I saw my father smile again once when his pension resumed. He placed the documents on the podium centered. "My father told me, 'This man will never get credit, but I need you to know he deserves it.'" Clark turned away, blinking. The mayor's mouth parted, but no sound came. Silence did the work. And then soft, almost shy, the first creak. A chair folding slowly as its occupant rose. Then another. Then another. Behind me, I heard it like the start of rain fabric brushing legs, shoes, scuffing grass. Not for him. For me. I didn't turn to count. I didn't need to. I reached into my pocket and closed my fingers around the chipped edge of the ring. Not to wear it. Just to feel its weight. My father didn't walk up. He didn't apologize. But for the first time, he looked. The sun had begun to dip, throwing the long shadows of folding chairs across the grass like silent witnesses. Most of the guests had trickled away, some talking in low murmurs, others avoiding eye contact altogether. Clark stood to the side, tie-loosened mouth pressed into a line like he was chewing a thought too large to swallow. The stage crew packed up slowly. Banner cords were unhooked, flags lowered with careful hands. The scent of trampled grass, sweat, and ceremonial plastic lingered in the air. And my father still stood. Both hands gripped the back of his chair. Not in defiance, just stillness. His gaze locked onto the patch of lawn where the soldiers had stood shoulder to shoulder. It wasn't a stare. It was memory in motion. The kind that loops until you finally let it finish. I didn't approach him. I stood near the fence again, not beyond it, but beside it. Then I heard it. The rhythmic click of a cane. Slow, sure. Silas Norwell walked up behind me, coat collar turned up against the breeze. The late sun caught the silver in his beard. He didn't smile, just offered a nod. "You made it through," he said. "No fireworks," I replied. "Better that way." He held out a small cloth pouch. Faded red the drawstring frayed. "What's this?" I asked, though I already knew. "It's not perfect," Silas said. "But neither are any of us." I opened the pouch. The ring rested inside, cool, heavier than I remembered. A thin silver line, faint but visible, curved around the chip like a scar that had chosen to heal rather than hide. It hadn't been polished, just sealed, reconciled. I rolled it between my fingers. The metal bore both flaw and repair side by side, not as a contradiction, as a biography. Without ceremony, I slipped it back on. Not for them, for me. The cold pressed into my skin, then settled like something long misplaced, now found. I didn't flex my hand. I didn't need to. From across the lawn I felt it before I saw it. My father turned his head, only slightly, just enough for his eyes to meet mine. He didn't move closer. He didn't lift a hand. But his gaze didn't flinch. It wasn't forgiveness. But it was presence, and that was enough. Silas gave a slow breath beside me. Sometimes that's all a man can give. "I'll take it," I said. We stood in silence, the kind that didn't ask to be filled. Behind us, the crew pulled the last banner down. A soldier collected leftover programs in a cardboard box. The wind carried a scrap of paper across the lawn, an abandoned name tag. Clark still hadn't moved. I turned toward the parking lot, the weight of the ring adjusting my hand like it belonged there again. No parade, no embrace, just a nod from a man who had until now refused to see. And that nod changed more than any speech could. The envelope had no return address. The handwriting was careful, unhurried. It arrived on a Monday, tucked between a catalog and an alumni magazine I never opened. The paper was thick, slightly yellowed, the kind used when a man wants to say something without typing it. I held it for a full minute before opening it. Not from fear, from reverence maybe, or fatigue. The porch creaked beneath my weight as I settled into the rocker. Autumn had laid its hand over Columbia, chill in the morning, warm by noon, indecisive by dusk. A light mist still clung to the trees out back, slowly burning away. Mason, my old shepherd, lifted one ear, sniffed the air, then went back to sleep beside my boots. I slit the envelope, cleanly unfolded the single page. Not to apologize, only to listen. No signature, but I didn't need one. My father's voice was in those 5 words more clearly than in any of his speeches, any of his medals. The same voice that once barked orders now waited. I didn't answer the letter. Instead, I got up, went inside, and pulled out the old thermos. Brewed 2 cups of coffee, 1 light, 1 black. Just like it used to be. Back on the porch, I wiped down the second rocker. It had collected dust pollen and a small leaf trapped in a crack between slats. I didn't scrub, just cleared enough for someone to sit without discomfort. I poured the coffee, set the second mug down carefully. Then I sat again, ring still cool on my finger, its silver line catching a soft glint of daylight. I didn't check the road. I didn't wait for a knock. That wasn't the point. The point was the second chair. The space made not demanded. The warmth offered not insisted. Mason shifted, exhaled, then rested his chin on my boot. A breeze stirred the sheer curtain behind the screen door. It moved just an inch like breath. Somewhere between the crack in that ring and the warmth of a second cup, I stopped needing to be right, and I started being ready. The second chair stayed empty that morning, but the coffee didn't get cold alone. Somewhere between the creak of the porch boards and the mist rising off the fields, I realized the ring on my hand no longer pinched. It didn't gleam. It didn't shout. But it stayed, and so did I. Sometimes healing isn't about making noise. It's about making space. If you've ever lost your place at a table, remember there's power in building your own, and grace in leaving a chair beside you. Has life ever handed you a second chance in disguise? I'd love to hear your story. Or if this touched something true, feel free to stay a while. This porch has room.